"We're selling the house," my mother announced over Sunday dinner, her voice cutting through the comfortable chatter like a knife through warm butter. "For Tyler's wedding, of course." I nearly choked on my roasted chicken. My father nodded approvingly beside her, as if this was the most reasonable decision in the world. My brother Tyler, sitting across from me with his fiancée Jessica, beamed like he just won the lottery. "You're what?" I managed, setting down my fork with shaking hands. "The Morrison family estate," my mother continued, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "Tyler and Jessica deserve a fairy tale wedding, and we want to give them the best start possible. The house should cover the cost beautifully. My name is Rooney Thompson. I'm 35 years old and I work as a senior marketing coordinator for Brightville Mining in Birmingham, Alabama. I've spent my entire adult life building a stable career while watching my parents bend over backward for my younger brother. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Where will you live?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. My father cleared his throat. "Well, we figured we could stay with you temporarily, just until we find something suitable." "Temporarily," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Tyler leaned forward eagerly. "Rooney, you should see the venue Jessica found. It's this incredible mansion with gardens and a ballroom. The whole thing will be like a movie." Jessica nodded enthusiastically, her engagement ring catching the light. "We're thinking 200 guests, maybe more. Live orchestra, professional photographers, the works." I stared at them, processing the magnitude of what they were asking. My parents had raised me in that house. Every childhood memory I had was tied to those walls, that garden, the creaky stairs I'd climbed thousands of times. "How much are we talking about?" I asked quietly. "The wedding will cost around $80,000, my mother said proudly. "Nothing but the best for our Tyler. $80,000 for one day." Meanwhile, I'd been living in a modest two-bedroom apartment for years, saving every penny I could because I knew that someday I might need to help my parents in their old age. I just never imagined they'd sell their security for a party. "And you've already decided this?" I asked. "Of course," my father said. "Family comes first, Rooney. You understand that." I smiled and nodded, but inside a cold realization was settling in. They hadn't asked for my opinion. They'd simply assumed I'd go along with their plan, just like I always had. But this time felt different. This time, I sensed something shifting inside me. A quiet voice whispering that maybe it was time to stop being the dependable daughter who never caused waves. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one. While Tyler was playing video games or hanging out with friends, I was helping my mother with household chores and maintaining perfect grades. My parents called me their little adult and praised my maturity. But looking back, I realized I'd never really had a choice. Tyler was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment he could walk, my parents treated him like spun gold. When he struggled in school, they hired tutors. When he wanted to play expensive sports, they bought all the equipment. When he crashed his first car at 17, they bought him another one the next week. Meanwhile, I paid for my own college education through scholarships and part-time jobs. I moved out at 22 and had been financially independent ever since. Not once had my parents offered to help with my student loans or my apartment deposit. "Rooney can handle herself," they'd always said, as if my competence somehow disqualified me from their support. "So, when's the big day?" I asked, forcing myself to sound interested. "June 15th, Jessica gushed. "It's going to be perfect. Tyler proposed at Christmas, and we've been planning ever since." That gave them less than 4 months to sell the house and plan this elaborate wedding. The timeline seemed impossible, but I'd learned not to underestimate my parents' ability to move mountains for Tyler. "Have you found a real estate agent yet?" I asked. We're meeting with someone tomorrow, my father replied. The market's good right now. We should get a fair price. I knew the house was worth at least $120,000, probably more given the recent improvements they'd made. The idea that they'd blow most of that on a single day made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. Well, I said carefully, I hope everything works out. Tyler reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thanks, sis. I know this is a big change, but you'll love having Mom and Dad around more. I squeezed back even as warning bells rang in my head. Having my parents around more was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid for the past 13 years. I loved them, but I also knew their expectations. They'd expect me to cook for them, clean up after them, and restructure my entire life around their needs. Of course, I said, my smile feeling more forced by the minute. We'll make it work. As dinner wound down and we moved to the living room for coffee, I found myself really looking at the house for the first time in years. The family photos lining the mantelpiece, the worn spots on the hardwood floors where we'd played as children. The kitchen window where my mother had always stood washing dishes. Soon, all of this would belong to strangers. Something was definitely wrong with this picture, but I wasn't quite ready to name what it was. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly marketing reports when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. House showing went great. 3 offers already. Tyler's wedding is going to be amazing. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The reality was setting in faster than I'd expected. I typed back a brief congratulations and tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept wandering. That evening, Tyler called me directly. Rooney, you won't believe it. Mom and Dad got an offer for $130,000. They're accepting it. That's wonderful, I said, though wonderful wasn't the word I'd have chosen. The closing is in 3 weeks. Mom wants to know if they can start moving some stuff to your place this weekend. I paused, looking around my carefully organized apartment. My 2-bedroom space was comfortable for 1 person, but adding 2 more people would be like shoving 3 elephants into a phone booth. This weekend, I asked. Just some clothes and personal items, Tyler assured me. The buyers want to move in pretty quickly, so Mom and Dad need to be out by the 1st of next month. Tyler, can I ask you something? Sure. Have you thought about what happens after the wedding? I mean, where Mom and Dad will live long-term. There was a pause. I figured they'd stay with you until they found something. Why is that a problem? The casual way he said it, like my entire life was disposable, like my space and privacy meant nothing, hit me harder than I'd expected. It's just that my apartment is pretty small, I said carefully. Come on, Rooney. You've got 2 bedrooms, and it's only temporary. Only temporary. Those words echoed in my head long after we hung up. I'd heard them before. When Tyler had stayed with me for just a few weeks after college graduation, when my parents had needed help with their taxes and ended up camping in my living room for a month. Temporary in my family's vocabulary seemed to mean indefinite. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the city lights of Birmingham. I'd worked so hard to build this life, this sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration, every quiet evening I spent reading or watching movies, it was all about to be disrupted. But it was more than just the inconvenience. It was the assumption that I'd just go along with it. That my life was somehow less important than Tyler's dreams. They'd sell their house for his wedding and expect me to pick up the pieces afterward. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Anger. Real deep burning anger at the unfairness of it all. I'd been the good daughter for 35 years. Maybe it was time to try something different. But I wasn't ready to act on that anger just yet. Instead, I smiled and began to plan. The following Saturday morning, my doorbell rang at 8 a.m. sharp. I opened it to find my parents standing there with enough suitcases and boxes to out a small army. Surprise! My mother chirped, pushing past me with an armload of hanging clothes. We thought we'd get an early start. My father followed with a stack of boxes labeled kitchen essentials, bedroom items, and important papers. Behind them, Tyler was unloading even more boxes from his truck. I thought you said just some clothes and personal items, I said, watching in horror as they began colonizing my living space. Well, we got a little carried away, my mother admitted, hanging her clothes in my coat closet. But this is so exciting. It'll be like old times. I highly doubted that. Old times hadn't involved sharing a bathroom with my parents or having my mother rearrange my kitchen because she didn't approve of my organizational system. Within 2 hours, my apartment was unrecognizable. My mother had taken over the kitchen, reorganizing my cabinets and declaring that my coffee maker was inadequate for 3 adults. My father had claimed my home office as his temporary command center, spreading his paperwork across my desk and connecting his ancient computer to my internet. Where am I supposed to work? I asked, staring at my displaced laptop. You can use the kitchen table, my mother suggested cheerfully. It'll be cozier. Cozier wasn't the word I'd use. By noon, I felt like a stranger in my own home. My parents had settled in with the confidence of people who'd never doubted their welcome. Tyler's picking out his tuxedo this afternoon, my mother announced over lunch. Jessica's dress cost $3,000. Can you imagine? But she looks like a princess in it. $3,000 for a dress she'd wear once. I calculated quickly. That was half of what I paid in rent for an entire year. Speaking of money, my father said, we might need to borrow a little from you to cover some of the wedding expenses, just until everything sells. I nearly choked on my sandwich. Borrow money? I thought the house sale was covering everything. It is mostly, my mother said quickly. But there are some extra costs we hadn't planned for. The flowers alone are running $1,500 more than we expected. How much do you need? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Maybe $5,000, my father said as if it were pocket change. Tyler's bachelor party is going to be in Las Vegas, and we want to help with that, too. $5,000 for a bachelor party. I felt the blood rushing to my face. And of course, we'll pay you back as soon as the house closes, my mother added. The house already sold, I pointed out. You said you accepted an offer. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Well, there's been a small complication, my father admitted. The buyers want to renegotiate the price. Something about the inspection. What kind of complication? They found some issues with the foundation and the roof. Nothing major, but they want us to lower the price by $20,000. $20,000. Suddenly, the math wasn't working anymore. If they'd planned to spend $80,000 on the wedding and the house sold for only $110,000 instead of $130,000, where would they live afterward? Are you still planning to take the offer? I asked. We have to, my mother said. Tyler's already put deposits down on everything. The wedding is in 3 months. I looked around my crowded apartment, understanding dawning on me like a cold sunrise. This wasn't temporary. They'd burned their bridges and expected me to be their safety net, not just for a few weeks, but indefinitely. The responsible daughter in me wanted to say yes, to write the check and solve their problems. But something else, something harder and angrier was stirring inside me. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of wedding planning chaos and increasingly crowded living conditions. My parents had officially moved in, claiming they needed to be out of the house for showings and inspections, but it was becoming clear that they had no concrete plans for moving out. Every morning, I woke up to find my mother reorganizing something else in my apartment. She'd rearranged my bathroom cabinet, declaring my skincare routine too complicated, and had started cooking elaborate meals that left my kitchen looking like a disaster zone. My father had commandeered my coffee table as his secondary workspace, spreading wedding vendor contracts and budget spreadsheets across every available surface. The $5,000 they'd asked to borrow had somehow become $7,000, then $10,000 as more unexpected expenses kept cropping up. "The caterer needs a deposit by tomorrow," my mother announced one Tuesday evening as I tried to eat my dinner in peace. "It's only another $3,000 only," I repeated, setting down my fork. "Tyler's so stressed about everything," she continued, oblivious to my tone. "This wedding needs to be perfect. He's our only son, and Jessica's family has such high standards." That was news to me. Every time I'd met Jessica's parents, they seemed like perfectly reasonable middle-class people. They weren't the ones demanding an $80,000 wedding. "What about after the wedding?" I asked. "Have you looked at any apartments?" My parents exchanged another one of those looks. "Well, we thought we might stay here a little longer," my father said carefully. "The wedding expenses have eaten into our down payment fund." "How much longer?" "Maybe 6 months, just until we get back on our feet." 6 months. I felt something inside me snap. "Dad, my lease renewal is coming up next month. If you're staying 6 months, I need to know so I can plan accordingly." "Oh, don't worry about that," my mother said brightly. "We can help with the rent increase. Consider it our contribution." They had no idea that I'd been planning to move to a bigger place after my lease was up. I'd been saving for a house down payment of my own, dreaming of a little place with a garden and enough space for a proper home office. Those dreams were evaporating as quickly as my savings account. That weekend, Tyler stopped by to show off his wedding rings. He seemed oblivious to the tension in the apartment, chattering excitedly about the bachelor party plans and the honeymoon in Italy that my parents were also helping to fund. "Ro, you're the best for letting Mom and Dad stay here," he said, giving me a hug. "I know it's cramped, but think of all the memories you're making." Memories? That was one way to put it. After he left, I found myself standing in my bedroom, the only space in the apartment that still felt remotely mine, and making a decision I'd been avoiding for weeks. I pulled out my laptop and started researching property management companies, rental agreements, tenant rights. I spent hours reading about legal protections for leaseholders and the process for adding unauthorized occupants to rental agreements. What I discovered was illuminating. My parents had been living in my apartment for over a month without being on the lease. My landlord could technically evict all of us if he found out. Moreover, if they stayed 6 months as planned, they might be able to claim tenant rights, making it nearly impossible for me to ask them to leave. I was trapped, and they either didn't realize it or didn't care. But I was done being the accommodating daughter. It was time to remind my family that actions had consequences and that their safety net might not be as secure as they thought. The breaking point came 3 weeks before Tyler's wedding. I came home from work to find my mother hosting what appeared to be a full bridal shower planning committee meeting in my living room. 8 women I'd never met were crowded around my coffee table, making decisions about centerpieces and party favors. "Rooney," my mother exclaimed when she saw me. "Perfect timing. These are Jessica's aunts and cousins. We're finalizing the bridal shower plans." I stood in my own doorway, holding my briefcase and staring at the invasion of strangers who were eating off my dishes and using my furniture as their personal planning headquarters. "The shower's going to be beautiful," one of Jessica's aunts gushed. "Your mother has such wonderful ideas." "We're thinking of having it here," my mother added casually. "It's so convenient and the space is just perfect for 30 guests." 30 guests in my apartment for a party I hadn't agreed to host. Mom, could I speak with you privately? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Of course, honey. Ladies, could you excuse us for just a moment? I led my mother to my bedroom and closed the door. You can't host a bridal shower here without asking me first. I said quietly. Oh, don't be silly. It's just family. 30 people isn't just family. And this is my apartment. I have to live here. My mother's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something that looked like annoyance. Rooney, I understand you're feeling overwhelmed, but this is important. Tyler's wedding is the most important day of his life, and we all need to support him. I am supporting him. I've lent you $10,000, given up my home office, and let you take over my entire life. But I draw the line at hosting parties I didn't agree to. It's one afternoon, my mother said, her voice getting sharper. Surely, you can be flexible for your brother's sake. What if I said no? The question hung in the air between us. My mother stared at me as if I'd suggested something completely unreasonable. Well, I suppose we'd have to find somewhere else, she said finally. But it would be very disappointing and expensive. We'd probably have to rent a venue, which means asking Tyler for more money. More money from the son who was already getting an $80,000 wedding funded by his parents' house sale. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Of course. What's your plan after the wedding? Specifically, where are you going to live? Another pause. Longer this time. We're working on that, she said carefully. Working on it. How? Have you looked at apartments, put in applications, set aside money for deposits? Rooney, why are you being so difficult about this? I'm not being difficult. I'm asking reasonable questions about my own living situation. My mother sat down on my bed, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she looked tired. The truth is, we spent more on the wedding than we planned. And with the house selling for less than we expected, we don't have enough left over for a proper place. How much do you have left after all the wedding expenses? Maybe $15,000. $15,000 in Birmingham. That might cover a security deposit and a few months' rent, but not much more. Certainly not enough to furnish a new place or handle unexpected expenses. So, your plan is to live with me indefinitely, I said. Just until we figure something else out. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was seeing her clearly. She wasn't the selfless family matriarch I'd always believed her to be. She was someone who'd made impulsive, financially irresponsible decisions and expected other people to clean up the mess. It was time to stop cleaning up messes that weren't mine to fix. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in my entire relationship with my family. I took control. I started by calling my landlord, Mr. Peterson, and explaining the situation honestly. As I'd suspected, having unauthorized long-term guests was a violation of my lease agreement. He gave me two options. Add my parents to the lease with an additional deposit and increased rent, or have them out within 30 days. I'll need them out, I told him. Next, I called the bank and put a freeze on any further withdrawals from my savings account. I'd already lent my parents $10,000, but I wasn't going to be their unlimited ATM anymore. Then I made the hardest call of all. Tyler, I said when he answered, we need to talk. Sure, what's up? I need Mom and Dad out of my apartment by next Friday. Silence. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. My landlord has informed me that having long-term guests violates my lease. They need to find somewhere else to stay, but the wedding is in 2 weeks. I know when the wedding is. That doesn't change my lease agreement. Rooney, you can't do this. Where are they supposed to go? I took a deep breath. Tyler, I've supported this wedding financially and logistically for months. I've given up my home, my privacy, and my savings. I've done my part. But there are parents. Yes, they are. They're your parents, too. Figure it out. You're being incredibly selfish, Tyler said, his voice rising. This is the most important day of my life. And every day is important in mine, I replied calmly. I won't be guilted into giving up my entire life for your wedding anymore. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The reaction was swift and predictable. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with angry calls and texts from my parents. And even Jessica. My mother showed up at my office that afternoon, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to us? She demanded. We're family. Family doesn't mean I have to sacrifice everything for everyone else's choices, I replied quietly. What are we supposed to do? We have nowhere to go. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were printouts of available rental apartments in Birmingham, along with contact information for temporary housing services and extended stay hotels. Here, I said, handing her the folder. I've done some research. There are several options that would work within your budget. She stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Rooney, we can't afford any of these. Not with the wedding expenses. Then maybe the wedding expenses need to be reconsidered. The words hung in the air between us. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I'd said what we were both thinking. That maybe an $80,000 wedding wasn't worth making the entire family financially unstable. You want us to cancel Tyler's wedding? My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper. I want you to make adult decisions about your finances and stop expecting me to fix the consequences, I said firmly. You chose to sell your house for this wedding. You chose to spend beyond your means. Those were your choices, not mine. My mother looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. I don't know who you've become, she said finally. I've become someone who values herself enough to set boundaries, I replied. It's long overdue. She left without another word, and I knew the real battle was just beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of family drama that I watched unfold from a safe distance. Tyler called me daily, alternating between anger and pleading. Jessica's parents, apparently sensing the financial instability, began asking pointed questions about the wedding budget. My parents, faced with the reality of finding new housing with limited funds, finally started making practical decisions. They found a small furnished apartment in a less expensive part of town, using most of their remaining savings for the deposit and first month's rent. The bridal shower was moved to Jessica's aunt's house. Several wedding expenses were cut, including the live orchestra and the elaborate flower arrangements. Tyler was furious, but he had a choice. Scale back the wedding or find another family member willing to bankroll his dreams. Since I was the only one with both the means and the previous willingness to help, and I was no longer playing that role, reality set in quickly. The most telling moment came when my father called me 3 days before the wedding. Rooney, he said, his voice weary. I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For taking advantage of your generosity? For assuming you'd always be there to fix our mistakes, for not respecting your space and your life. I was quiet for a moment, processing words I'd never expected to hear from him. Thank you, I said finally. That means a lot. The wedding is still happening, he continued. It'll be smaller, simpler, but it'll be nice, and we'll manage on our own afterward. I'm glad to hear that. Are you still coming? I'd been wondering about that myself. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely to make a statement about how their treatment had affected me, but another part of me, the part that still loved my brother despite everything, wanted to be there for his actual moment of happiness. Yes, I said, I'll be there. The wedding day arrived with typical June weather in Birmingham, hot and humid with afternoon thunderstorms threatened. The venue was still beautiful, just smaller than originally planned. Tyler looked handsome in his tuxedo, and Jessica was radiant in her $3,000 dress. During the ceremony, I found myself thinking about family and sacrifice, and the difference between supporting people you love and enabling their poor decisions. I'd spent so many years believing that love meant saying yes to everything, that boundaries were selfish. But watching Tyler and Jessica exchange vows, seeing my parents sitting together in the front row of their more modest venue, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force people to face reality. After the reception, Tyler found me by the parking lot. "Rooney," he said, looking sheepish, "I owe you an apology too." "What for?" "For taking you for granted. For assuming your life was less important than mine. For never considering what all of this cost you." I hugged my little brother, feeling some of the tension between us finally ease. "I love you, Tyler. I always will. But I won't be your family's unlimited safety net anymore." "I understand," he said. "And I respect that." As I drove home that evening to my quiet, organized apartment, my space, my sanctuary, my life reclaimed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. My parents found their footing in their new apartment and learned to live within their actual means. Tyler and Jessica settled into married life with a more realistic understanding of finances and family boundaries. And I kept my savings, my space, and most importantly, my self-respect. The next month, I put in an offer on a small house with a garden and a proper home office. It was time to start building the life I'd always wanted instead of the one everyone else expected me to live. Looking back on my revenge journey, I realized it wasn't really about punishing my family. It was about reclaiming my power and teaching them that love doesn't mean unlimited sacrifice. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, even when those people are the ones you love most.